DevOps architect is going to join the forum from Catchpoint. We have with us Mr. Zachary Henderson, who is a solutions engineer at Catchpoint. He works with clients to help them understand how Catchpoint can help them deliver faster and better online experiences for customers and employees alike. In his upcoming session, Zach shall be throwing some light on the positive and not so positive impact of the Core Web Vitals initiative of Google. We're going to find that and a lot more in his talk, which is aptly titled Seeing the Elephant in the Room. Let's give a big round of victory wave for the one and only Mr. Zachary Henderson. Coming to your screens.
Hello, and thank you for joining the India DevOps Summit presented today by Catchpoint, titled Seeing the Elephant in the Room. My name is Zach Henderson. I'm a solution engineer at Catchpoint, the leader in digital experience observability, and I hope to help you see how Catchpoint can help you improve your digital experience end-to-end for all the users and services that are using your applications on a day-to-day basis. Now, what do I mean by the elephant in the room? Well, this is the main topic we'll quickly introduce here in just a second. But then after that, I'll kind of tie this into what Catchpoint actually does as a platform end-to-end, then give you a quick hands-on demonstration of the service so you have some understanding of the different capabilities that Catchpoint helps to kind of address this general problem or elephant in the room that we speak of. So let's get right into it. The problem that we see, or the elephant in the room, so to speak. The concept of user experience is very important when it comes to understanding how responsive, available, and user-friendly a lot of the digital applications that we use on a day-to-day basis. Whether you're an employee, whether you're a consumer visiting a website or web property, we all tend to know when a site is a good experience in terms of speedy. Is it fast? Is it available? Are there errors being presented to the users? And there's a lot of work in the industry over the years to help quantify and provide metrics that relate not only to the users themselves, but also to the IT team supporting them, to the business that's using these digital channels to run parts of the business and so forth. And so Google, as influential and as kind of market leader in this type of space, has come up with these general concept of core web vitals. And these core web vitals are metrics. These are measurements that they use, that they provide for understanding a few markers on how speedy, responsive, and pleasant of a user experience you're presenting to your users when they come to your website, come to your application, and so forth. These are extremely important and immensely useful. We now, using these metrics of largest contentful paint, first input delay, layout shifts, we can now talk about the ranges and quality of experience first. So the idea is, are users waiting for assets to load on your website? Are users experiencing a site that has some input delay and they get frustrated when trying to use the platform? Or is the site shifting around a lot and the users don't know if there's some sort of stability to your application as a whole? And these are immensely useful. You can use this to talk to the business. Google uses them for SEO rankings, in fact. But you can also use them to level set your deluge of metrics out there and say, are we hitting these KPIs for user experience? And are they in a range that's been shown, kind of studied to be good, needs improvement, poor? And these can set good baselines for what you need to target and measure out there. Not the end all be all on metrics and measurements. There's a lot of other talks that will go into those as well. But these are kind of good tools that you can use to understand the quality of experience that you're presenting to your user base out there. But there's kind of a bit of a problem with this and how it's currently instrumented in the world. There are plenty of tools out there to measure them, to run tests, to get these calculated. They're very popular. But the general problem, or the elephant in the room, is that there's also a real user component to this. And for a lot of the web vital data out there, a lot of the data that people use when they say we have our robotic baselines, we have real user traffic, they're using a real user traffic set that is purely based on a general Chrome user experience report. So Google has provided this. They have a lot of telemetry captured from the Chromium browsers that's reporting back into their system that calculate these LCPs across multiple domains, multiple parts of your site. And it's a great resource for understanding how that particular Chrome browser ecosystem is having a quality user experience for your users. And it's also a nice view to say how are you changing or trending, let's say a month basis. But this is challenging when it comes to understanding other browsers. This browser is purely based on Chrome traffic. It's troubling when it comes to trying to understand the underlying dimensions and viewpoints underneath that data set, as it is an aggregated data set over time. And that data is not necessarily real time. You don't know how are you doing at this moment, how are you doing last week. It's more of an aggregated month-over-month basis. And so this results in a lot of really useful information, but it lacks the ability to provide some additional context and expand your scope beyond just this individual report. And as a fact here, even with all real user data sets, there is even a bit of a survivorship bias where only users that can get to your site, experience the site, are showing up in this report. And you maybe have a lot of users out there that are having issues where they can't even generally show up in this traffic report from Google because they can't load your site. They're having troubles getting to it as a general first step into your site's ecosystem. And so the reason this is really important is because relying on real user traffic to analyze your site is actually, it's very real, right? You have users, you have your applications, you have what people think of being kind of a simple internet path, network services type path, where that user traffic will carry over. And if you get a glimpse of it, you'll kind of see the health of your site over the internet. But in reality, what actually happens is that users are coming from multiple destinations, multiple locations, multiple different device types. They're traveling, they're on different networks. Their traffic is carried over a variety of last mile wireless backbone internet providers, talking to a variety of different distributed services that make your site work, from DNS providers to content delivery network providers to third-party marketing tags, analytics, and other services you have in the site. And then from there, the actual platform that you're running and hosting these applications on, they can also be as equally distributed, where it's not just users, network, data center. It's multiple different users, multiple different networks, multiple different hosting app providers, from cloud, SaaS services, on-premise applications still. And this is even getting into before even the concept of distributed architecture, microservices, all the kind of back-end components that are powering your applications, even beyond the outside view perspective that users have of actually accessing your site and service. And so when it comes to real user traffic, you have to make sure, and in a sense, that you see this end to end. You have an understanding of your user base, your delivery platform, and your hosting infrastructure, because that's going to provide you a better understanding of your user experience beyond just three general KPIs from a single kind of small segmented user set out there in the marketplace. And the biggest problem is that if you're just relying on that Chrome user experience report or some basic tests, you might be blind, you most likely are blind, to all this infrastructure as it is public. You don't have your own platform running on these servers, these vantage points, these routers of the internet. And so this is a large part of your user experience is actually determined by infrastructure that you don't own. And if they have a good experience, everything's fine, things are good. But if they have a bad experience and then on your site, and then they go to Google or Amazon or Facebook and they have a good quality of experience on that perspective, they're not going to blame their network or their site or their infrastructure on their side. They're going to blame your site, even though could be something completely out of your control as a whole. And so how does Catchpoint kind of help solve this problem of talking about user experience, talking about those concepts of the core web vitals, the kind of ideals that they're championing out there in the world? But how do we do this and kind of provide that deeper insight into delivery, platform, user base, and so forth? And so Catchpoint does operate the largest global active monitoring network in the world, around almost 1,000 locations. I've even updated from this slide here, where from real cities, real ISPs, real countries, real perspectives, we will actively monitor and test and observe your site, not only for those core web vitals, but for its latency, its time to first byte, its before and after release and changes, and have a data set that's kind of protecting your traffic 24/7 from real locations and real providers. And this is complemented by a kind of rich set of user experience data. So measuring, observing your site from real locations, real providers around a global footprint to match your global user base. We'll then use that to observe and understand from a real browser perspective, from a real user experience perspective, the health and experience that people have in your site. Think the core web vitals, the user experience metrics. But then we dive a bit deeper and talk about your network, your platform delivery, your infrastructure components. Are your DNS providers, your CDN providers, your BGP routes working correctly? And then even going a bit further and tying this into your application observability, where are these applications or SaaS tools or APIs that you're running in the cloud, on premise, and so forth? Are they working correctly, and are they the cause of a poor user experience as opposed to the public infrastructure that you're carrying your users' traffic over? And just as a quick aside here too, Catchpoint also does not only measure from a global perspective, capture real user traffic, analyze a bunch of the different layers of delivering traffic over the internet for your user base. It also provides web page tests as a kind of gold standard, real browser, real device testing across not only Chrome, but Edge, Firefox, and providing a kind of deep, raw insight from the actual browser base to run speed tests, run kind of analytics, and help you optimize what you're delivering, where the web page test results will set you up for a good experience. And then making sure that that is getting actually delivered to the user base, that's where that real kind of global network, that real user traffic that we'll cover, will really come in to fill in the gaps from dev to delivery to user experience as a whole. And so even before we start talking about going beyond Web Vitals and going beyond that real user data report from Google, you kind of have to think in a very basic sense. There are no Web Vitals if my application is not up, or if users can't get to my site, or if Web Vitals are even the best measure of speed and performance and user experience for my site and for the reliability that people have and expect from it. So when we talk about user experience, there are some general questions that we should be answering beyond just those few KPIs that I talked about in the core Web Vitals report. These are the ideas of availability, reachability, site reliability, and performance of the application end to end. And these things have to be thought of in terms of your business, your user base, your sites, because the performance of a Google search is completely different than that of trying to run a large report in some sort of large data set system, right? There's different expectations for how your application should be available or reachable out there in the internet. And so kind of talking about these different pillars a bit further, there's kind of very simple idea here where availability, if users try to go to your site and they get an error, that's a pretty binary nature, right? It's either up or it's down. And then every service, every application, every part of your system has its own availability. So it's not just in today's modern age, monolithic applications where your site's up or down. You could have components of it that are working fine, components of it that aren't working fine. And those micro dependencies on the user side, they can feel that in different ways. If they load your application, say a bank app, and they don't have that stock ticker, they may not want to go back to the app as a whole, even though the whole app itself was fine. They can log in, but if they can't see that stock ticker powered by that microservice, they may have a poor experience and decide to do their business elsewhere, for example. And as a result, this binary nature of being up or down, it's usually the easiest to monitor, understand, and conceptualize. You want to know if you're up or down or not. And it really only can be generated and tested via some sort of synthetic traffic where some service is actively polling your site asking, is it up, is it down, and then sending out alerts or sending out notifications or performing automation events to help you get ahead of those events before users are actually impacted in the field. But availability is only so good as reachability as well. And it's kind of a key differentiator. If your cloud infrastructure is healthy, your application's able to process the hundreds of thousands or millions of requests that you've designed it to, and it's available, it's ready to go, but users can't get to it, that's a problem not with availability, but with the concept of actually reachability. So understanding, can users hit your origin? Can they resolve your domains through DNS to find your content delivery providers? And this comes down to measuring from real cities, real perspectives, because these type of reachability concerns, these are typically the things that are outside of your control, where an ISP, a third-party internet service provider, a third-party DNS or content delivery network, their infrastructure, their platform can actually really impact your user base, because where your users' traffic flows through the internet really matters and how they can reach your site. And this is not only your infrastructure, but also third parties as well, where your third-party assets on your site are having reachability errors that may impact the functionality and overall user experience of the system as a whole. In these type of reachability concerns, as we said, it might be out of your control, but you still will most likely be held accountable for these, right? For the most common part of the user base out there, global users on the internet, they will go to your site, get an error. Maybe it's because of a third-party content delivery service having issues with the configuration on that platform, for example. And then they'll go to Facebook or Amazon or Google or try to load a Netflix video, and they can get it just fine. They can say, hey, my network is working fine. I can run a speed test and see I have the bandwidth I'm paying for. But these kind of reliability concerns, these are the things that they'll hold you accountable to, whereas why can't this app or this site be as reachable or reliable as these tools I use on a day-to-day basis? And these typical things can be highly network infrastructure dependent. Think your DNS issues, your BGP route leaks, your internet service providers out in the world, the sort of vendors and solutions that you partner with to make your application deliver at scale across the globe. But it can also even be your infrastructure, your application, things, your firewalls, load balancers, these type of things where if users can't transact, they can't get to your site, there's really no user experience to be had at all. And then when it comes to performance, it's probably the one that's most tied to that quality of core web vitals, where they're actually trying to measure things where the speed that people feel your site loading, they feel the site having a certain smoothness or quality or kind of nice responsiveness in terms of their interaction, their input. These metrics of performance really kind of matter when it comes to knowing, can people get to my content? Can they interact with it as fast as possible so that they don't lose focus? They can really become engrossed inside the content you're trying to deliver. But the idea here is that there's plenty of platforms out there, just like web page tests, that will run this for you in a simulated lab environment, granted with network throttling, real devices, real browsers, and so forth. But it's only that quick snapshot in time of your site's performance. It's not the actual performance of real people out in the world transacting, trying to hit your infrastructure that you're using to deliver this platform, because there's so many variables you have to consider beyond the test of a single test run or test scope. Things like browser, operating system, versions of those platforms, user traffic, networks, and so forth. And the reason this is important is because all of that kind of variables you have to consider, those are add all those up, and that is your actual user experience. And if you don't have a system that can accurately capture that data and analyze it and ensure its quality end to end, you might be missing out on some key things that you should be improving on, where perhaps your site really isn't optimized as you think it is for mobile traffic versus desktop traffic, or for Firefox versus Chrome. And to make your job easier, having a system that accurately captures that and you can trust it is key, but also having a system that you can use to analyze on the fly, visualize on the fly, so you can communicate and talk to your peers and to your business leads on what you need to make to optimize it. And this kind of concept of performance, even if you have all the right data, you have all the right analytics, and you can communicate and visualize it, if you don't have a platform where you can experiment and test out quick optimizations on your site, that might just be a roadblock in and of itself, where you may have all the right data, but you don't know what to actually do with it. And so understanding and being able to have some quick feedback loops on optimization scenarios, these are areas where your performance is going to get improved. You can test it and verify it, but also you have a real user data set to actually say, once we pushed out to production, once users are actually using this platform we developed, are these KPIs in terms of user experience being met by the actual people out there with their browser base, their operating systems, the traffic that's actually hitting the platform that's delivering your application code. This is the key thing too on this concept of performance, right? And kind of how the tool really matters. If you're just getting an average or a summary or an aggregation of your data points for your core web vitals, for example, or any performance metric in that matter, if it's just an average, or even if it's just a standard calculation of that data, just a 95th, just a median, for example, that may not be enough to actually help you understand your system. So that's a nice kind of funny graph here. All of these data sets, the dinosaur, the star, the bullseye, the horizontal, vertical lines you see here, if you were to add up all these data points, divide them by the total sum of data points, you would get the same number, the same average across all these different graphs. But we know as a visual creature here that the data set for the star is completely different than the data set for the circle or the dinosaur, for example. And so if you don't have a system that can help you process and analyze the raw data and help you visualize it in ways to see these type of trends and deviations, you may be misleading yourself in terms of what your actual KPIs and performance of your real user base is out there in the field. And I just like talk about this too, which is if you do give that one number and you can see a trend of it over time, that might not be the right number for you to analyze. You may want to be able to see that distribution, that change in those behavioral patterns, so to speak, of your performance numbers over time, where is that the most optimal site? Are some users hitting that average response time, or other users kind of having a really poor experience, and there's some users that are really fast? The kind of distribution analysis is type of looking at your metrics holistically end to end in a platform that has these type of aggregation capabilities and statistical calculation capabilities built into it, but always have that kind of raw data underneath, so that when there is a doubt, when you need to dig further, you can tell if your data is that star or that dinosaur, for example, from that previous graph. And so we talked a lot about how kind of core web vitals, the limitations of just running some basic tests, relying on a real user data set from the Chrome user experience report, and how those things can kind of blind you a little bit to the reality of A, how your code's optimized and built, B, how it's being delivered, and also C, how it's experienced by actual users out in the field. And so with this, I'm actually going to hop into a kind of live demonstration where I'll show you how the Catchpoint platform helps answer those kind of those areas where you have that lack of visibility with, hopefully you'll see with our RUM and synthetic and web page test solutions, we get a bit of a more, and hopefully complete view of your user experience and beyond just those few metrics and that general report from your user traffic. Great. And so let me begin here with an actual web page test result. So the kind of web page test being the gold standard in terms of understanding and running performance tests to find how are users generally experiencing my site given a certain set of inputs, and what can I do to optimize that? And you'll see here with this kind of one example, understanding your web page experience, it is starting with the core web vitals, understanding your paint times, your layout shift times, your blocking times, those metrics out there that are indicating when things are visually rendering on the page. And that's something that people will talk about when it comes to speed, when it comes to availability and reliability, beyond just the milliseconds of delivering assets and images and so forth. That being said, those milliseconds do matter when you're trying to optimize user experience. So this concept of having kind of rich, detailed service to help you say, is my site quick? Is it usable? Is it resilient? Here are the stats and metrics underneath that in which you should use to optimize the assets you're loading in what order. Make sure you're not loading large images. Your JavaScript is not sending unnecessary content, so to speak. You're kind of optimizing that delivery mechanism and helping you understand those things, how they impact your service. And actually, a key thing with web page tests is that there's also the idea of running those quick optimization experiments yourself. So without you having to change your code, you can kind of have some tips here on how to improve first byte time, how to identify JavaScript files that are blocking page rendering, identifying style sheets that are also blocking that page rendering, understanding what parts of these things need to be improved, and actually even running experiments to say, what if I made this optimization in my code? Would this actually tell the browser to handle my site differently? And ideally optimize and improve that web vital experience out in the field. But these kind of experiments and these snapshots, these are great for telling you, has your site been optimized as you have control over it to make sure that it's working correctly and that there's nothing you've done that's kind of causing that slowness for your site, that poor user experience out in the field. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee that once users are hitting your site in production from wherever they are, from wherever browsers, devices, or platforms that they have, they're actually experiencing what you've tested here, or what you've experimented on. Because sometimes these experiments, they may be good in this one perspective, but as a whole, you may want to just verify and understand, did that actual improvement of changing these JavaScript files to not block page rendering as much, is that something that once we did that and we experimented it and we saw it in a lab, did it actually work out in the field? And so that's actually where the Catchpoint real user data set comes in. We're using a piece of tracking code on your site, on your platform, your website, your portal, so to speak. We will capture your web vitals from real user traffic. We'll analyze where that user traffic comes from and help you understand globally where your user traffic is. So in this case, understanding in the United States that in this particular case, the performance from New Jersey in this one case is a bit higher compared to that of Florida or Texas, for example. So even just generally seeing where your user's coming from sometimes can provide a lot of insight on, are you suited to deliver content in that market? Is that the key area in which slowness is happening to your site? And this is important too, because we can then look at this and help you understand what networks people are visiting your site from, how those performance KPIs are trending over time, and also identify what part of the platform people are visiting, what are the top browsers, top operating systems that people visit. And this will help you kind of see that there's a lot of traffic on your site beyond just Chrome. It could be traffic from Firefox or from Safari or from browsers running on Linux or running on Mac OS. These are platforms out there that have a lot of users actually out there using your platform. If you don't know that the performance delta between those is noticeable and negligible, and not negligible, but actually impacting your overall user experience, that might be something you miss just by running those few browser-centric tests, those few kind of real user data sets that you're looking at from the Chrome User Experience Report. And these dashboards kind of help highlight the complexity and understanding of your user base. And then what happens is that raw data we spoke of underneath, you can have a system here on demand where you can now explore that raw data. So the questions with real user traffic and so forth, you may want to say, Catchpoint, I have my app, I have my site. Can you show me just traffic in the US on cellular connections and give me a report by browser? Yes, that's kind of those capabilities and questions you can use this kind of platform here, this BI performance tooling, so to speak, to perform those type of questions and analytics end to end. And as you'll see, it even helps you answer things beyond just the largest contentful pane or core web vitals type metrics in the field, which is if I have a high LCP time, I only see that for Chrome or Android browsers or Edge browsers. I don't see that for Safari or for Firefox, for example. I may want to actually understand other performance metrics that those browsers make available, things like your document complete times, your interactive DOM times, your DOM loaded times, for example, and correlate those type of performance metrics across the browsers to how they correlate with the LCP times that we're reporting, not only from this data set, but from the other data sets you've used, like the Chrome user experience report, so as an example. This type of kind of multivariate analysis, it's built to trend over time, allow you to see month over month, week over week comparisons to see how things are improving and looking in your site, and even filtering down to very specific scenarios where if you need to see just the performance of a certain user base out there, understanding that most of your traffic is happening on a particular version of Chrome, a particular version of Firefox or Edge, for example. There's even the ability to filter down to any kind of individual user segments out there to help really narrow and pinpoint on this user demographic has this experience. Here are the metrics and values that indicate their speed, their reliability, their errors they're seeing in the platform, because there's kind of a rich data set here in which to look at and query all the different components of how your site is being perceived by users out in the field. This kind of goes into a few different reports and graphs. On demand, you have the ability to run those raw data reports and bring up site by site, page by page view by single page app view across different browsers, dimensions, network traffic patterns, and either build those high level KPI reports like you saw in that initial dashboard, or kind of drill down into this data set and say, I need to analyze individual user sessions in the field, and I want to be able to see what pages, in this case, a user on Verizon Wireless on the Mac OS browser was doing when they went through the site, understand these key performance, not only just the core web vitals, like their kind of speed, but the performance of each and every individual asset on the page, and know that it's not for this particular user, their speed, their experience is heavily dictated by the performance of these assets on the page, for example. And those are things that should be looked into and optimized if you start to see that at scale across multiple different users. And this concept of kind of raw data, looking at this allows you to quickly switch and say, I need to see, at this given time at 8:15, there was an outlier where real people, real users out there were experiencing a poor quality experience. Let me click into that. Let me figure out what's going on and see if this is something that we should work to optimize as a whole, whether it's our content, third-party content, or this particular user coming from this city, this network provider, this platform, end to end. And so this type of real user traffic, as you've kind of seen, it's really taking in your user base. It's really measuring when people are on your site and when they're actively interacting with it. But you may also want to say, I need to have a 24/7 view of my site, of my system, where regardless of user traffic, I need to know if it's up. I need to know the speed and performance. And I want to see this from actual user locations. And that's where that global network I spoke of before comes in, where actually every dot you see here on the screen, these are one of those vantage points where if you want to test from the mainland US or from Hawaii or Alaska, you have that capability. If you want to test from India, from China, from South America, Africa, you have that capability. And these locations, these are reflective of actual user traffic. So these aren't running in the same cloud infrastructure or same cloud regions that you're serving your content from. These are running from real providers, like where I'm based, in this case, running from AT&T in Boston or from Cogent or Comcast or Verizon, even down to wireless infrastructure like 4G, 5G networks in the field. We're measuring from their users' first perspective. You get a good sense of if I run a speed test on my site, I do my page load, my page transactions, I hit these APIs, I'm reflecting and replicating the traffic patterns that my users actually have when they visit my site. So if I start to see things in my real user data set and I want to test those optimizations I made with web page tests, this is now a global testing network to have your quick verifications, but also verify, regardless of user traffic, is your site ready? Is it available to receive transactions from a availability, reachability, and performance standpoint without having to change or instrument anything on your code itself? This type of kind of multi-layer synthetic view testing is rather useful when it comes to detecting outages, detecting performance degradations, knowing how does your site compare now versus last week, or this morning versus last night. All those kind of general questions where these type of probes across the globe, or even probes you spin up in your own internet, in your own network, for example, they'll give you that trusted baseline on the speed, reliability, and availability of your site to help answer a lot of kind of key questions across all the different teams that are serving your content. So as an example, this here is a kind of basic synthetic transaction. It's actually a 5-step transaction, navigating through a platform, signing in, performing some functions and services. And what we've actually identified here is there's a certain baseline to how quickly this site replies, this kind of blue line up top here. There's also a certain availability of how the site should look for your users out there. Is it up? Is it down? Is it reachable, for example? And as you can start to see, there's one time frame with kind of large red bars here, indicating a large amount of downtime for this particular site. What actually happens is that this is something that, from a user layer, you can quickly identify that there is downtime. It's happening from real perspectives, real markets. In this case, the Boston's, Comcast, the Denver Zaos, the Los Angeles, Seattle level 3, for example, markets of the world. And it's impacting your response times, and it's impacting your ability. And the kind of main culprit here is your networking metrics of sorts, not your web metrics. It's not the resolution, DNS resolution metrics. It's your ability for users to connect into your platform, causing high response times, causing this kind of large spike in connection errors and reachability errors for real users out in the field. And this is happening not only just from those few cities I mentioned, but is an outage impacting every kind of user base out in the field pretty much simultaneously at the same time. And this is important because this outage here is fairly apparent when the site is down. It's not reachable. Users can't get to it no matter where they are. But imagine this is a micro outage. Imagine what happened at this individual data point is that the same thing that happened at this kind of large outage that you see here. And so this kind of view, this kind of seeing into this multi-layers is rather useful for reducing that M time to reaction, right? Where you want to identify, detect things quickly. That's what these robotic probes are for. But then you also want to hopefully identify who should be fixing this, who can we help to reset whatever needs to be reset, and then share that data with them end to end to say the thing that you said was working, whether in this case the connectivity into the site, is that something that you can address quickly to hopefully get the site back up and running, as opposed to looking at through the back end health of your infrastructure, your applications, where this is purely just a users can't connect into the platform. And to that end, kind of the ease of communication between different providers and teams on your side, we actually do calculate the idea of round trip time and packet loss from the different cities and networks that we're measuring from. We are looking at the trend of your assets. So did the site change recently in terms of how many bytes it's delivering, in terms of response times of certain parts of the application? Or is it something where purely the routing of the internet actually impacts your performance? So in this case, kind of the main smoking gun here with that particular outage was this site, its BGP routes, they actually had a large amount of withdrawals on their side, where no network peer that we were seeing could actually reach the site across, in this case, the United States, where things were 100% reachable, things were 100% available from a routing perspective and how to get to your infrastructure. But as soon as that went down, the internet had no GPS on how to connect to your site. Therefore, there was nothing to connect to. Connect times were high, connections were failing. And as a result, once this was kind of identified, ideally you would want to know that quickly and work with the team to actually bring this site back up from a BGP reachability perspective, because then that would actually bring your site back into line with the performance expectations across this user journey transaction that you see in the field. And so this type of kind of viewpoint here, these are things where you may want to kind of click into these records and see, at a given time, what is the individual route and performance from a certain city, certain network provider? What is the performance of those application queries end to end? Think, instead of looking at the records from that real user traffic, but looking at it, a snapshot of an individual transaction from a certain city network provider at a certain time. That can be really powerful to identify those deviations, those outliers, and so forth. But I guess I'll kind of leave you with this here, is that this multi-layer testing, this real user traffic, this is all built to help you see your user base in kind of a global view, right? And what this graph is going to show you here is actually our synthetic node network and how it replicates hitting a distributed infrastructure, and understanding that, when the site is loaded from the US, it can be served from different POPs and different perspectives. That experience is completely different when your site is not designed to load in, say, markets like China, for example, or markets like India or Asia Pacific, for example, where if users were trying to visit your site from these vantage points, some of those users have to traverse all the way outside of China, in this example, to get to San Jose, to get to LAX. And that kind of large arc across the globe, it just very simply adds latency, adds poor user experience. And if you don't see that, you don't kind of understand that this infrastructure is performing that end to end for your user base. And if China is a market that you see a lot of traffic from, or China is a market that you want to optimize in to achieve your business goals as a unit, that might be something that you might be blind to because you weren't seeing that in that Google kind of Chrome user experience score report. You weren't seeing that in the general core Web Vitals snapshot test that you made, where looking at things in a live real-time sense and kind of this unaggregated view, where you then have the ability to visualize and present it like you see here, that can be really powerful, because this is now a discussion. For example, if you have a platform delivery team that's working to make your site work in China, you can say, well, the site's faster when it goes to Hong Kong or when it goes to other parts of China, for example. What can we do to prevent our traffic from having to traverse across the globe, adding in lots of latency, lots of round trip times in the networking pure aspect of pure distance between user and service that can cause those kind of poor Web Vital reports that you may be seeing or may not be seeing, depending on the aggregation that you see in your data sets. And then underneath all this, there's that kind of multivariate questioning of how often does that happen? Is this something we should be aware of? How bad of a problem is this, for example, where looking at China, for example, okay, most of the time it does, in this particular traffic base, we'll go to San Jose pretty often, SJC airport code, but also it can go to Dallas, Fort Worth, go to the US. But then from the same city on a different network, that provider is a lot faster. It gets mapped to go to Hong Kong. That's a lot of a different experience, even within the same city, same market of China. Even just a general difference between China Mobile and China Telecom, and this is hundreds of milliseconds difference just for a simple query against this infrastructure, where just that pure individual perspective of going back to the United States and having that additional latency really actually does add a lot of noticeable impact. And are you optimizing not only your code as it should be defined and delivered by your service, but also are you optimizing how it's being delivered, how it's being perceived, and does this kind of global view, this understanding of your users out there, help you see in a bit of a clearer sense of, are we meeting the goals and KPIs that we set out to when we had this initiative to improve our core web vitals? Or are we just trying to optimize for one report or one service that's only a small kind of component of your user delivery chain? And so I hope you kind of get a general understanding so far of kind of the realm and synthetic and web page test ecosystem that Catchpoint provides and how it kind of fits into this framework of improving your experience beyond just the services that Google has been championing and working on tirelessly. And we're very thankful for that as well, just to be sure. And so as an end, we know we want to make sure that you understand that we help our clients deliver exceptional user experience to customers, but also to employees. We also make sure that you assuredly understand quality service continuity is met, reliability and performance is met. And then by doing this, you're protecting your revenue, you're protecting your brand, protecting and growing your business end to end, whether it's SLA enforcement or productivity of your workforce. And then when things do go wrong, things will ultimately never work 100%. It's just the real world that we live in, that your teams are best equipped to work together to identify the contributing or root cause and hopefully identify, detect, and remediate things as fast as possible without having to rely on finger pointing or back and forth between different teams saying everything looks fine. We just want you to be able to troubleshoot with assurance that you're actually doing this in a way that's impacting and hopefully providing a better user experience that will your users out in the field. And so if you ever do want to give this a try, you like some of the screens or some of the topics I discussed today, kind of go beyond web vitals, so to speak, and hopefully solve that elephant in the room, feel free to try out the Catchpoint platform. Simply go to www.catchpoint.com/trial, and we'll be happy to talk to you and happy to work with you. So thank you all for the time, and I do hope you had a great time with this session, and I do wish you a great day. Thank you.